During the previous time-lapse installment, you saw me build the lower helixes. This time I'm going to present the first 2 weeks of construction of the middle deck. You see here I'm making a parts list for the first few frames, and now I'm ripping a whole lot of plywood on the table saw. It may not be particularly obvious, but I have to cut the strips in several different widths. Now having a bit of a clean up. And I am making a whole load of parts for the first 3 frames. As I've said before, it's often more economical in effort to do the parts for more than one at a time. And then I realized that I hadn't cut enough plywood because there was another cutting list on the back of my sheet of notes. So I had to get the table saw out again. Now I'm marking out where the wiring holes need to go on all the cross pieces. Now I've just moved over to the drill press and I'm starting to cut all those holes. And there are quite a lot of them. Here my stepson came in, opened the front door to let all the warm air out, so now I had to figure out where I was and get back into the rhythm of things. This is a good example of why I choose to work without help. Anyway, now I am assembling the first of the frames for the middle deck. You can see the heels of the bottom corners of the first 2 C brackets that will support the upper deck. And you may also notice that the far end of it is not closed off. That's because this frame is more than 8 feet long, so I need to splice another piece onto the end of it. Now I'm making that piece. Here I am joining the 2 parts together, and you can see there is a piece stuck out of one corner by the chop saw because this first frame is an L shape. And the end of the L is not 90 degrees. The end of it has to be angled to miss the helix. I cut that to length by trial and error. And as the end piece wanted to curve a little bit, I wedged a temporary diagonal brace in to keep everything square. Now I'm working on some support pieces. The first 3 are the temporary legs that lift it up from the lower frame along the back wall in front of the garage doors. Ultimately, there'll be a ledger board there because it needs to be anchored firmly to the wall. But at the moment, I don't have a wall there, which is why I need that temporary leg in the front. You can see a vertical strip of plywood clamped to it. Now I am working on the other supports, and each one is different. I'm pretty much making it up as I go along. And then you saw me put in the permanent temporary leg. Now I'm just making sure that everything is right. And I'm building a bracket to anchor it to the side of the helix. Now I have to have a think brake because contrary to common belief, I don't necessarily know exactly how everything's going to work in advance. Sometimes I just have to make it up as I go along. Here I'm building a corner piece to support the curved corner of the fascia. I think it's about a 14-inch radius curve. And here I'm doing the exit from the helix and the sub-road bed from the lower main line over that first frame. And I'm cutting all the sub-road bed about 6 inches wide, even though it's a single track. That gives me plenty of leeway. I don't have to have the curves plotted exactly, as long as I know approximately where they're going. And it's a lot easier to cut off excess wood afterwards than it is to add more. I keep coming back to the chop saw because I have to angle the ends, and each one is different. I don't know what the angle is going to be until I test fit it. You can probably see that I'm working with multiple levels of different lengths. I have a 2, a 4, and a 6-foot level. That way I've always got one that is a good length for the process at hand. Okay, this is the start of the second day. And the first thing I had to do here was to go back and modify the sub-road bed that I put in the previous day, because as I mentioned in the regular series, I forgot the step where I go from the thin foam to the thick foam road bed. So I'm putting in that 1/8 inch step now. It didn't take me very long. And now readjusting everything that I'd done before. It was just 3 sets of risers. And now I am working on the supports for the stream bed that cuts across the middle near where the temporary leg is. That requires a cutout in the front support, so I'm reinforcing the back of it. Now I'm making the riverbed out of a piece of 1/2 inch plywood, so it's actually structural. Once that is all in place, I can go back to continuing the sub-road bed across the top of it. I'm building it in one solid piece, and then I will cut it out later for the bridge. That way I know everything aligns properly, and the 2% grade continues smoothly right through the bridge. Not quite sure what I'm doing at the moment. Okay, now I'm clearing off the workbench so that I can start working on the second frame. And this one is a lot simpler. It's just a basic rectangle, and it's less than 8 feet long, so it goes together quickly. You can see another one of those double joists where the C brackets go. And if you look closely by the chop saw, you can see that I've had to notch a few of the end joists for the grade. Now I'm building a ledger board to fit on the end of the first frame. The second one sits on, and as I put it in place, you can see the 3-inch step that allows for the falling grade down to the helix, while also maximising the reach-in distance above the staging yard. Now I'm getting that piece supported accurately at the right height. making sure it's perfectly level. Now I am building a shelf to put on the wall to support the corner of that frame and the next one. The problem here is that it's several inches away from the wall, so just a straightforward ledger board like I will use in the client's train room doesn't work here. So I cobbled that shelf together from scrap wood. And now I'm working on more bracing to make sure that the two levels are tied together properly. At the moment, the middle deck is supported on top of the staging level. Eventually, the middle deck will be cantilevered from the wall and the staging level will be hung from it, minimizing the number of legs that will get in the way of access and storage. And now with that done, I can start on the next frame. And this one wraps slightly around the corner of the room, so it's another L-shaped piece. Where I'm joining the two pieces of the L together. Give it a quick sand. I took it over to the other end of the room. At this point, I noticed that the middle level had twisted about 1/8 of an inch out of alignment. It wasn't quite where it needed to be, so I had to modify one of the supports to also act as a brace to crank it over into the right place, and inserting that between the first two frames. It's important to make sure the bench width is accurate because it is the foundation for the track and everything else that goes on top of it. It's probably not very clear what I'm doing right now. Of course, unfortunately, I had a black sweatshirt on and right in the distance in the corner is not very well lit. But basically, I am getting the third frame properly supported, making sure that it's braced in every direction. Here I inserted strips of plastic bag between those two frames because where the backdrop eventually had to go, there was a very real chance of glue dripping down between them and gluing them together. These strips of grocery bag prevent that from happening because the wood glue won't stick it. And now here is another view of the second day's progress from the other time-lapse camera. You can see I started off by making that adjustment with the jigsaw, cutting the sub-road bed in half, installing the stepped splice plate, and then readjusting the grade to get everything correct again. You can see me adding the various parts for the stream bed. Now once that's in place, I'm installing the sub-road bed over the top of it. As I mentioned in the regular series, I had to get the sub-road bed in the whole length of that first frame before I could figure out exactly what I needed in the way of cutouts in the next frame. See me install that second frame, get it properly attached, bolting it together, and then making sure that it's properly leveled in all directions, and working out what I need in the way of supports for that back corner. Third frame. And then you saw me plumb the second level. That's where I discovered that I needed that extra piece to hold it properly in alignment. And with that done, all I've got to do is get the last frame installed in the corner. Anyway, that is all for this installment. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again next time. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.